without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Terry Rice. He's, we got introduced through Honeybook, and I was following his journey and his work. He's a author, writer, coach, contributor to and the business development expert in residence as Entrepreneur Magazine. Previously, you came from corporate, such as Adobe and Facebook. So really, I think Terry has the perspective of what it's like working at large enterprises across teams to becoming an entrepreneur and focusing on helping entrepreneurs and freelancers build their own careers. Because at the end of the day, freelancers, you are an entrepreneur, you are a business owner. How do you get to the next level of your business? And the topic of, how do you position yourself in the eyes of the client as a thought partner versus a commodity has come up pretty frequently recently. I think I would start off by identifying what does commodity mean, right? It means different things for different people. And I thought Mark had a really good explanation last time, and I'm just going to paraphrase. Basically, how replaceable are you, right? So if you go to Upwork, if you use a lot of these, freelance job sites, you see, okay, this is what the client wants to do. This is the job title, and this is the rate, right? And then they're just going through profiles and seeing, hi, Kristen, good to see you. And basically just taking their pick without really knowing who you are and having the opportunity to understand what's your unique offering. So in a sense, that's commoditizing us as entrepreneurs and freelancers who each have our own unique abilities. So how do we break through that and empower ourselves, shift the power dynamic so that we earn the race that we want to be billed at, and continue to build a reputation, get good feedback, and scale your business. So I think that's the goal of the discussion here. And Terry has prepared something fantastic for us. I previewed his slides. So Terry, please jump in.
Will do. All right. So thank you for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen. If you want to give me permission to do that, that would be amazing. And let's see if I get it right on the first take. It's always a bit of a crapshoot, but we'll see if I get that right. Momentarily.
I just made the host. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Cool. So can you all see my screen, or do you see yourselves? Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. And I'll keep the introduction brief because we already got a chance to do that. But yeah, so my name's Terry Rice, and I've been working as a business development consultant for about 5 years. And normally what I do is I help entrepreneurs either start or scale their business, often a knowledge-based business. So you might be a consultant or run an agency, maybe you're a digital marketer. But my goal is to get you paid for who you are, not just what you do, right? So you don't want to be seen as a commodity. And then previous to that, yeah, I worked in-house at Facebook. I worked at Adobe, more or less in a consultant role for clients like BarkBox, Bonobos, Warby Parker. And I realized the amount of money that these companies were being billed by Facebook and Adobe was not really the same amount as I was getting paid. So I was like, I might as well just do this myself. I feel like a lot of you probably had that same feeling, especially when you get that 10-year itch. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. Also an advisor at NYU, Amazon, doing stuff with Google. So it's really working with a lot of smaller organizations as opposed to like the Walmarts and the Amazons like I used to. Well, Amazon corporate like I used to. So that's me. I have my social here, have my email, my website. If you take any screen grabs or want to share anything on social, I'd love it if you would share with me. I love collecting those afterwards. So you can tag me, you can tag Braintrust, and it'll be a great way just to aggregate some of those key takeaways. But let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to share some of my experiences as a consultant, just to kind of frame the context of what we're talking about. So this is a real email that I got from one of my clients before, and it just annoyed the heck out of me. He would do this maybe, I don't know, a couple times a week. Hey, can you resend me that email that you sent? And I'm like, dude, how does your search box work on your email? I just type in the person's name and then every email they sent me comes up. And it's like, I get it, I'm on a retainer, but still, it's like, you don't treat a grown adult like that, where it's like, I'm too lazy to search for this, so you do it for me. And even though this client had a pretty good retainer, I actually stopped working with them just because of stuff like that. I just didn't feel like I was being respected. And I complained about it to my wife so much. She's like, you just got to quit. Like, she's like, because I don't want to hear about it anymore. So you just got to stop. So that's one example. Here's another one from this person that signed me off of, I think, Upwork. Like the one time I used that. This guy said to me, hey, I'm under a lot of pressure, so I'm going to put that pressure on you. And I was like, dude, I don't know what happened before we signed this contract, but that's on you. Like, I'm here to help you. But I know I remember we signed the contract on a Friday afternoon. And that Saturday, he sent me an email saying, hey, how come nothing's been done yet? And I was like, a lot's been done. I went to the gym. I watched my kids. I took a nap. I'm like, we just signed the contract, chill out. And again, as a result of that, I was like, I can't work with you because you're projecting this negative energy. And again, you don't value the work that I'm providing. So I want to make sure that you're not in those situations, that you're presenting yourself in a way where people are like, hey, I value you, not just for what you do, but who you are. And reason being, your clients will get rid of a service provider or a vendor very quickly, but they appreciate the input of a business partner or a thought partner. And that's how you want to position yourself, right? Cool. So go through the agenda. First thing I want you to do is learn how to gain visibility to attract and land clients. It's a lot easier to book a client when they've heard you speak somewhere, saw something you posted on social media, maybe something you wrote, as opposed to you reaching out cold calling, right? So I want you to have this magnetic messaging that draws people into you, as opposed to you reaching out to them. And then from there, increasing client satisfaction, because ease of doing business is how you get these renewals and referrals, right? It's not just, did you get the job done? It's like, how easy was this person to work with? So little things like when you send an email, anticipating the question they might have and then answering that in the email too, right? Just cutting down on that back and forth. And one thing that I do is if it's a complex situation, I'll often send a video. I use a tool called Loom. It's just use loom.com. It's a free resource. And I'll say, look, there's some information here, but let me just talk you through this real quick. Little things like that increase the ease of doing business as well as the client satisfaction. Book more renewals. That's the goal too, right? Because when you're working with a client, if you can have them renew, then you can spend less time trying to find more clients and more time operating your zone of genius, which is whatever your skill is. Because I guarantee the majority of you did not get into business to become a business development expert. But unfortunately, that's what you have to do sometimes. But if you get these renewals, you're like, well, shoot, my goal was to make this much revenue this quarter. I'm already there with renewals. Now I can kind of just relax on the biz dev side and maybe develop myself some more, right? Maybe I'll find a good meditation app or go to that conference or, read a good book, whatever it is. So I want to show you how to get these renewals. And then lastly, earn more referrals and testimonials, right? Because that way your reputation is what gets you more business, again, as opposed to doing any kind of outreach. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But we're going to start with gaining visibility to attract and land clients. So like I said before, you're more likely to book a client who reaches out to you because then you have all the leverage. You can say, hey, Margot, I saw that you posted this blog about the best ways to optimize your landing page. I have a few questions. Can we talk? Sure. You can book a time with me through Acuity or Calendly. You want to have this process set up in advance. But again, they're coming to you. So you're more or less interviewing them. Okay, why would this be a good fit based on the challenge that you have? So you want to keep that leverage. So one way to do that is to create content, right? And some people are like, look, I'm good at UX. I'm a good developer. I can't write. I can write code, but I can't write necessarily on LinkedIn. So here's the easiest content marketing plan ever. So get ready to take a screenshot or write this down, whatever helps it stick. Step number 1, think of 10 questions that your audience has, right? And your audience very well because you're dealing with them on a regular basis, right? So maybe if I'm a digital marketer, it's how much should I spend on my ad campaigns? Should I be on Pinterest as well as Instagram? If I'm an app developer, should I develop iOS and Android? Who's going to install my SDK for me? Things like that. But think of, or what is an SDK? By the way, it stands for Software Development Kit. So there you go. There's one question if you're an app developer. So think of these 10 questions and then just answer them with content. Questions create content. So if you just answer one question per week, you have about 2.5 months worth of content to put on LinkedIn. You can write an article about it. You can also do a video as well. So getting this content out is going to attract people to you. They're going to say, hey, I saw you post this thing about, the best ways to optimize your landing page. Can you take a look at mine and let me know what you think? That's how you attract people, by positioning yourself as a resource to answer the questions. Now, outside of just answering questions, you also want to show your personality to an extent. So if you feel comfortable, what you can do is record yourself answering these questions. Now, for me, I don't necessarily record a lot of video content because I'm a little awkward sometimes, I'll be honest, right? So I need the context for the situation. So what you can do is just use those questions as the context, where you're saying, okay, we got a question here from Mike. He's asking, hey, what's the best way to register your app with Facebook? Okay, good question. And then you would just answer it, right? So some of you might have seen like those mean tweets before. I believe it's on Jimmy Fallon, when people are just like literally looking down at their phone saying, whatever in this case the question would be, and then answering or responding to it. So you can have this be very organic, right? It's not practice. You're not reading up a teleprompter. You're not saying, oh, I forgot my line. It's just a natural way for you to prove your expertise by answering questions, right? So in this case, we're saying Omar wants to know the difference between a tracking cookie and a pixel. Good question, Omar. Actually, a pixel drops a cookie. But anyways, you get the point. You're just doing this on a regular basis. But then the cool thing is what you can do is say, hey, if you have more questions for me, reach out to me, DM me, email me, right? So you're building your brand, but you're also building this magnetic messaging, which is drawing more people into you, asking you questions, right? And if any questions do come up as I'm talking, just feel free to stop me. Again, I have 3 kids. I get interrupted all the time. But how does this feel so far as a way to just present yourself as an expert without trying too hard, I would say, without scrambling to think what you're going to say, and without worrying about sounding silly, with all this prep time or anything like that? How does this feel as an approach so far? Getting some thumbs up. Awesome. Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah, hop in.
So some people are like, well, I don't really know where to post my content. Like I don't have a huge social media following, or, I post to LinkedIn and 2 people like it. Like,
Yeah.
is that, worth my time, or am I thinking about this wrong?
Well, first of all, I just want to say never associate like your self-worth with the amount of engagement you're getting on social media. There are reasons why you're getting more engagement than you might, but it depends on your audience, right? So if you were talking about like the food industry, Pinterest might be a good fit. For most of us, I think it's going to be LinkedIn and Twitter. About 80% of B2B leads come from LinkedIn, 13% come from Twitter. But what I would say is if you're not getting engagement, there might be a few reasons why. First of all, are you using hashtags? Hashtags are what identify the theme of the content. And you would search for these by searching for hashtag developer, hashtag SEO, hashtag whatever makes sense. But then also look to see how many people are actually following those hashtags. So for me, I do hashtag consultants a lot, but there's also hashtag consultant, singular. But hashtag consultants has like 14,000 followers. Consultant singular has like 3. So do some research on what hashtags make sense. But then beyond that, make sure that you actually engage with other people's content as well, right? Because it's a 2-way street. So if you're saying, how come no one's engaging with my content? I would say, well, are you doing the same thing? Because if you engage with other people's content, that tells the algorithm, wow, it looks like Terry likes Shirley's content. We should show Shirley Terry's content as well. So make sure that you are interacting with that. Another question from Adrian is saying, would you recommend posting your blog to your LinkedIn profile? Yeah, you can have that as an article. So posts are shorter form content that's like 1,300 characters. An article is more like a blog, and that can be longer form. But the benefit of having an article is you can, it'll show up for SEO as well. So if someone searches for terms related to your article, it'll also show up there. And then beyond that, if someone's just researching your profile, they can click through and see that article as well. So I definitely would repurpose that. You might as well throw it on Medium while you're at it and just get more distribution for it. So I would do that. Another question. Yeah, Mark, good call. You want to make sure that you actually quantify like the value of the content that you're putting out there. So maybe the question is, would you like to learn how to, you know, land more leads and then go into it? But don't just say like, I recently wrote something about blah, 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 like you lost the audience, right? So just have some what we call thumb stopping statement that gets people to stop scrolling and start engaging. And let me give you a good example of this. It's actually going to be kind of meta. But the other day, I wrote a post on LinkedIn. It said, this is going to sound hypocritical, but here goes. And then I said, I teach consultants and other entrepreneurs how to use LinkedIn, but I actually don't post that often. Every time I do, one of my kids is screaming at me and I get distracted. So that's why I don't post as much as I want to. But even if you can't post content, if you can't create it, you can still engage. So for me, what I do is I try to engage at least 10 times a day, right? So that's a real tip, but it's also thumb stopping content when I'm like, this is going to sound hypocritical, but here goes. You're like, oh, what's up with this cliffhanger? What's he going to talk about, right? So you can do stuff like that. So to Mark's point, super important to do that. Mary's saying, do hashtags work on LinkedIn? Yeah, they worked very well. I only have like 2,300 connections. And I know one of my posts this year got like 70,000 views. So they work, in my opinion, better than they do on any other platform. Because if you do it on Instagram, it's like, okay, cool, you get like 4 or 5 views maybe. But my posts on LinkedIn, just the minimum is usually around 5,000 views. But this year, the most I ever got was 70,000 just from using hashtags. So if you're not using those, you're definitely hurting yourself. So please do use those. What are my thoughts on using podcasts to gain content and potential B2B clients? Do it. Yeah. So this guy that I know, he helps people produce podcasts, but he also helps them find clients in their target audience to interview with the goal of making them clients. But you have an excuse to reach out. You're gonna say, hey, Omar, I see, you're very, well-versed in this industry. I would love to interview you for my podcast. And that's how people are getting clients. So I think it's a great way to, first of all, directly reach out to people that you want to work with, but also position yourself as a thought opinion leader by all the great content that you're putting out, right? You need that guy's name, Ash? Yeah, reach out to me. And Ash, thanks for attending. His name's Jonathan Bastille, but reach out to me and I'll do that. So and the reason why I love this question is because that's something we can do without having a huge platform, without having, a lot of technology, it's just a microphone, and you reaching out to people saying, hey, I'd love to interview you, right? And the benefit is you're stroking someone's ego. You're like, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to talk to you, right? They'll give you 20 minutes. So I strongly recommend doing that. More questions. Do I have a range I'd like to stay in with my hashtag so it doesn't look too spammy? Yeah, I do, Ashley. Because otherwise it's like, you have like 3 words and the rest is all like hashtags. It's like, what the heck, dude? So normally I don't do more than like 3 or 4. And I usually use the same ones over and over again, unless it's contextually relevant to use a different one. So I know like on Instagram, you can use up to 30, but on LinkedIn, I definitely wouldn't do that. What you can do though, is within the text, you can use a hashtag if the word fits in, or when you comment based on someone else's comment, you can also use a hashtag there. But it does look kind of spammy if you have like a billion hashtags. What's a good tool for online auto-forming online articles? No clue. I don't know. I haven't used that before. So online articles, I mean, LinkedIn, if you do the LinkedIn articles, it's kind of done for you. There's a lot of questions here. So what's the best tool for client calendar management? I'm using a color coding Google Calendar. So what I use, Nicole, for your content calendar is Google HubSpot Content Calendar. They have a free one that I would recommend using. And it's color coded, but it also allows you to align what you're going to do on different channels on different days, but have an overall campaign for a period of time as well. So do that. I wish I had thought to actually write down these questions, because I could just make this a video too, or it's just me just answering questions on LinkedIn. But these are great. So let me do one more. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have so much good content. Why don't we save these questions to the end? Because I would love people to be able to hear what you have prepared.
Yeah, cool. Cool, let's keep it going. So from here, going back to building that status, right, of people coming to you and reaching out to you, what you would do is distribute and pitch that content, right? So you're going to post those key takeaways on social media. But then the cool thing is you can pitch yourself to appear on relevant media platforms. Like, I have all these questions from my target audience. You know, what are they most concerned about going into COVID? Or, you know, why are they, you know, afraid to use one app platform versus another? And since you've taken the time to more or less source all this information from that target audience, you're seen as more credible, right? Because you have all these questions you've been consuming. You can consolidate those down to, let's say, the 5 or 10 most prominent, and then say, hey, I'd love to talk about this at the App Developers Conference or something along those lines. That's the benefit of having all that information. Because when you're reaching out to these organizations, you need what are called signature speaking topics, right? You're gonna say, I have this very valuable information that's gonna be great for your target audience. So if I'm in SEO, I could say, I have this amazing speech about how COVID, people being at home more during the day, has impacted SEO due to the increased amount of time on mobile. I would love to deliver this at your upcoming conference or through a webinar, whatever makes sense. But you always want to have this valuable piece of content to share with the target audience who has access to your audience. Therefore, you're not trying to reach one person on social media. You're trying to reach one organization that says yes to you. Then they do all the recruiting. And all you have to do is show up and deliver that speech, right? If you follow this model, everything else is much easier because you're not spending energy recruiting. You're spending energy coming up with good content and then delivering it, right? So if you follow that model, you'll be in a good spot. Cool. So increasing client satisfaction, super important. So we talked about the ease of doing business already. It all starts with a seamless onboarding process. So you know what access you need, what tools you need, whatever it is. Have all that stuff ready in advance. Create a template that has this email go out and says, hey, glad to be working with you. I need access to this, 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 and this. And there's links to maybe a Google form or whatever it is. That way you're set up for success from the beginning. And there's not a lot of back and forth where they're like, oh man, everything was great during the sales call and now it's kind of going downhill. So you'll set the tone for that. And for me, it took me a while to actually start doing that. I would try to like copy and paste stuff from other calls I had. And then finally I just said, okay, let me make a template for this. But you want to have a very solid onboarding process because it also shows that you're in control of the project. Yes, they hired you, but now you're in my process and I have it well developed. I'm not making it up right before I get on the call. And having that freelance helps you project confidence because clarity is the precursor to confidence. And people pick up on that confidence and they're like, oh, it's not just like some, random, freelancer I got off Upwork or whatever. This person has their stuff together, right? So just start with that authoritative approach and carry that with you throughout the rest of the relationship. And also just don't become a yes person. I see that so often. I've been guilty before. A client will say, hey, can you do this? You're like, sure, yeah, I got you, whatever. And you don't ever push back and say why. So what I would ask you to do is to actually build dissension and collaboration into the communication process. So when someone says, hey, we're going to stop actually working on this project and we're going to flip it over to this. Can you get started on that? Just say why, like just politely, like why, what's the reason for this? They might say, well, we heard rumor that this might happen. You might say, yeah, but from what I'm hearing, it's very unlikely. And if it does, it won't happen until Q1. So maybe we should stick with this first. Right? Because a lot of times you're working with solopreneurs who they have a remote team, but they don't have someone to bounce ideas off of. They just hear something, they're like, okay, let's do this. So they're looking for that pushback, right? And if you don't, then you're not positioning yourself as a business partner or a thought partner. Again, you're just another vendor and you're not helping them better themselves or their business. You're just an order taker. So you don't want to do that. Give you a really good example. This is a pink Corvette, you're right. And I was listening to this podcast and this guy was talking about how he hires remote workers. He says, I ask them questions that make sense. Like, can you send me an example of this? Can you send me 3 testimonials? Can you show me, like your website, things like that. And then he asked them to send them a picture of a pink Corvette. And he says, if people don't ask why I need to see a picture of a pink Corvette, I won't even continue the process. He wants them to push back and say, like, why do you need to see a picture of a pink Corvette? How is this relevant? If you don't stick up for yourself and just pre-qualify the need to search for this image, this guy won't hire you, right? Because again, it shows you're just taking orders. You're not thinking critically, well, why should I do this? Because you are the expert. They hired you because you're the expert. So before you just take orders for them, you should say like, wait a second, why does this make sense? Let me think about this, right? So build that dissension into the communication process. So you can ask clarifying questions like, hey, did you consider any other approaches? Like, why are we going to this route? Like, I'm just curious how we landed here. Or does this timeline align with your other initiatives? You have a lot of stuff going on. You're saying you want to get this done by this date. Like, does this make sense? Does this jive? Here's one of my favorite questions. Can you give me an example of what success looks like? And I say it because you'll get all these projects. They're like, hey, do this. And you're like, okay. And then you do it. They're like, that's not what I want. I'm like, well, what do you want? Right? So you're going to say like, what does success look like? And if they can't answer that question, that tells you they don't really know what they want. So you have to go back to the top of the conversation. Okay, why are we doing this in the first place? So that last one is super important. What does success look like? Thank you for someone for annotating that. I appreciate that. That's a good one. Also, ask high value questions. This is one of my favorite. Okay, so you want to redo the design of your app. What scares you about that approach? I'm kind of concerned. Maybe it's too late in the year to do it. We got to be ramped up by Q4, and if we're not, we're in trouble. Okay, so let's talk about this some more. When you ask people that, it's like, again, you're building dissension into the process. You want to do this? Cool. We're just curious. What scares you about that? And people, it shocks them when you ask this, because they'll double back like, wait, what? Well, if you want to be honest, it's this. Okay, here are some ways we can avoid that worst case scenario from happening, or maybe we shouldn't do this just yet, right? But you're looking for areas of vulnerability in the project that you could eventually get blamed for, by the way, and saying, let's just talk about this now proactively, right? So often you do a post-mortem when you have a project, what went right, what went wrong. I'm asking you to do a pre-mortem. What could go wrong? And then have a contingency plan in place for that. So I would write that down, do a pre-mortem as opposed to just doing a post-mortem. Another one is, well, how can we increase the impact of this? Okay, cool, you want to do that. You want to increase conversion rate by 30%. How can we go even bigger? Okay, we could do some changes on the website. We can also update the functionality. We could also, do some other bells and whistles. But just encourage people to be even more ambitious with their goals is what I'm saying, right? Because we all need this coach, this cheerleader who's saying, look, you did this, but I think you can do one more rep. I think you can do this a little bit more. So challenge them and yourselves to expand the scope and the success of the project. Another one I like is, how can we differentiate ourselves from what's already out there? If it seems like, oh, this is like another whatever it is, how can we stand out a bit more, right? Another thing I like to do is to provide guidance that's beneficial to the client, but is not necessarily part of your job description, because it shows them that you're thinking about them even when it's not something that you're necessarily tasked with doing, right? You're not just waiting to get an order or have an email come in. You're like, okay, well, here's something I discovered. I want to share it with you, even though it's not aligned with the scope that I'm operating in. Is there a way to get rid of this little green thing? I don't know. it's not bothering me too much, but just in case it is, let me know. We'll keep rolling though. So this is one of my favorite books, Hooked. Has anyone read this? Just yes or no in the comments. Hooked. It's more or less about product design and development. No? Okay. Let me give you some input on it, and I'll tell you why you might want to check it out. So this book, Hooked, is more or less telling you how to create products that solve problems, as opposed to creating products that don't have an actual problem associated with them. And one thing I learned during this book, Hooked, is what's called a viral cycle. So the viral cycle is the amount of time it takes a user to recommend another user to use your product. So let's say you have this app, it's a bookkeeping app. A viral cycle is how long does that person have to use this app before they tell a colleague, hey, you should use this app as well. And your goal is to shorten those viral cycles. That's how you grow quicker. If it takes them 3 days instead of 7 days, you will grow faster. So you want to shorten these viral cycles in order to accelerate the growth of your company in this case. And I thought that was fascinating. And for me, I was thinking, all right, well, I used to do digital marketing. So let's say you do have an app. What you could do is run ads or emails to current users and encourage them to go back and use the app more. Because the way to decrease viral cycles is to increase usage, right? The more someone uses an app, the shorter the viral cycle. So now we can actually, use this to our advantage and engage current app users more. So here's an example of how this guy who's an app developer could leverage that with his client, Omar, right? You can say, hey, I read this book, Hooked, where the author talks about viral cycles and all this stuff I just said, by the way. So I'm not gonna read the whole thing. You're gonna say, hey, have you considered running retargeting ads or high value emails to increase app usage? So in this case, the person writing this email is an app developer. They're not a biz dev person. They're not a digital marketer, but they read this book. They're like, you know what? This would help my client. These are the things that you want to do. It's these micro moments that really define who you are as, in this case, an app developer, and provide value to your target audience. So just look for those opportunities when you're just going about your day, like, hey, you know what? This would help this client, and just reach out. Because again, it shows you're thinking about them even when you're not on the clock. Something else I found, uninstall ratios for Android versus iOS are actually higher. So people who use Androids are more likely to uninstall than people who use iOS. Didn't know that. Fun fact, I discovered at 5 in the morning when I was making this deck. But again, if you're this app developer, that's good information. You would say, hey, I saw this report that indicated Android users are more likely to uninstall. Are you seeing this as well? If so, do you want to focus more on iOS? Just asking, right? And then from there, some kind of conversation will come up. Here's another thing. Uninstall rates actually jumped a lot during COVID. So we're seeing 2019 in the green, 2020 in the blue. Uninstall rates have increased during COVID, but they've increased far more for Android than they have for iOS. Why? I don't know. But this is the thing. So again, if I'm that app developer, finding something relevant and saying, hey, by the way, I saw this thing, I have a few ideas around decreasing churn, meaning uninstalls during Q4. Would you like to chat about this in the next few days? What I'm doing right now is called future selling. I'm selling myself into the future of the company. Because right now it's, it's Q2, Q3, whatever. But I'm saying, hey, I have some ideas how we can improve things in Q4. Do you want to chat about it? Now, if they say yes, guess what? I'm still working on this contract through Q4. You always want to find opportunities to insert yourself in the future of the company, right? This is an example of that. Another thing, ask for feedback. I know a lot of you had 9-to-5s before when you might get, monthly feedback, quarterly feedback. As a freelancer, as a consultant, as a contractor, whatever you want to say, as a remote worker, you actually have to proactively ask for that feedback, which can be scary, right? Because you're like, if they're not complaining, it's going to keep the ball going. But you do want to do this because that's how you improve both yourself and the relationship. So a few ways to do that. One thing is to ask for a jot, just one thing that could help improve the project. You say, just top of your head, give me just one thing, give me an email that can be improved or expanded upon. So I call those jots. And then at key milestones, you're gonna ask a very scary question. Hey, based on our progress, do you still feel good about the decision to work with me? That's a tough one, right? Because you're like, oh, we're about to get off the call. Let me just keep it going, have a good weekend. You gotta ask this question because they will give you, again, all this feedback that you need to keep them as a happy client, book a referral or a renewal, and then perhaps improve your business to make it easier for you to attract and retain more clients going forward, right? So scary question, but you gotta have those tough conversations sometimes. Speaking of renewals, so that's why you wanna gain a clear understanding of the company's mission and build yourself into it. So that's why I was saying in that email, like, hey, going into Q4, I have some ideas. You're gonna just bake yourself into that future state of the company. But be sure to ask for renewals before the contract ends. Don't wait till 2 weeks out and say, okay, well, we're almost done end of the week. What's going on? You're going to insert this conversation months before the contract is about to end or whatever timeline seems appropriate based on what you're doing, right? But just keep it in the conversation. So here's a example. Hey, I'm glad we got a chance to chat about those UX updates. I think it's gonna help with retention. As a heads up, our initial contract is set to end in 2 months, and the action items we discussed would take about 6 months to implement. So we're supposed to end in 2 months, but the stuff we talked about would take 6 months. Do you want to start working on another contract now? Right? So you're locking yourself in. And again, the benefit is there's less anxiety where's my next paycheck coming from? Because you already have this locked in for 6 months now, as opposed to another 2. But if they're like, I don't really think so. Okay, cool. Good to know. Now you know you do have to focus more on biz dev. And that's fine. But at least it's not a surprise 2 weeks before the contract ends. Oh, by the way, 30% of your revenue, that's actually going away. Okay? So you don't want to do that because it's happened to me before and it hurts, right? Marianne's saying that they felt that. Yeah, I hear you. Earn more referrals and testimonials. Again, this is super important because people are 4 times more likely to buy when they're referred by a friend. So it just reduces the friction in the conversion process. One of my clients, Mike Swagunski, started working with him last year. We worked together for, I think it was like 3 or 4 months. Then he introduced me to his friend, Alan Howard. I've been working with him for 6 months. He introduced me to another friend, his buddy, Andrew, and we're gonna start working together this month. So 1 yes from Mike got me 2 more people just based on the reputation that I built with Mike, right? So again, you want to ask for these referrals and I'll show you how. But also 97% of B2B customers cited testimonials and peer recommendations as their most reliable type of content. So you can say on your website, I'm the best, I went to this school, I'm awesome, click here, love me. But they're saying no, testimonials and recommendations are really what we're looking for. You need that third-party validation. Super important. So the best time to ask for a testimonial is right after you got positive feedback. So if you're like, hey, how'd that product go? It went great. Hey, by the way, can you just put that in an email? Can I put that on my website? You're literally going to use that as your entry point to say, hey, you just gave me some praise. I appreciate that. Can we make this more formalized? Can I share it with other people? So keep that in mind. Anytime you get kudos, that's the best time to ask for a testimonial or even a referral. So here's an example of what you can write, and I'm just giving you this for context. We can say, hey, as you can imagine, one way to grow my business is through referrals and testimonials. So with that, I have a couple asks. Do you know anyone else who might be interested in working with me? And would you feel comfortable sharing your feedback about my work by way of testimonial? Happy to discuss in real time and completely understand if you would not feel comfortable with one or both requests. I do this all the time. And the only pushback I've ever received is, this is gonna sound weird, but like, I'll do it, but can you write it for me? And I'm like, sure, if you want, I'll give you like bullet points or whatever. But that's the most pushback I've received is like, I just don't feel like writing it. And I'll admit, I feel the same way with LinkedIn recommendations. Whenever someone asks me for one, I'm like, I'll do it, just write it though. Like, I don't want to do that. So again, leverage this opportunity to go ahead and ask for a referral. Last few slides, then plenty of time for Q&A, luckily. But let's talk about your mindset and your commitment to excellence. So you want to get paid for who you are, not just what you do, but the way you do that is by focusing on building your personal brand and your network by the content you create and the value that you provide, right? So just putting that content out there. If you can't create content, you can still comment, right? Because I know a lot of us, we don't feel like writing or we're just not good at it or we think we're not good at it. That's probably a limiting belief. But if you can't create content, you can still comment. People will recognize that, see that, and you'll still get rewarded for that, right? And that's how you build your personal brand as well. And you might think, Terry, look, everyone's heard this stuff before. They haven't heard it from you, right? And Gary Vaynerchuk in his book, Crushing It, he's like, every great story's already been told, but has not been told by you with your unique perspective and your unique voice. So don't feel like you have to reinvent something, right? You can chime in the same conversation with your own spin on it, right? So don't go crazy trying to be original. And also have this thought in your head, right? Approach every opportunity with a thought, what do I have to do to get a testimonial or a referral from this client? And then perform at that level. That should not be your motivation. But if you perform at that level of excellence, you will have no problem making the client happy and getting these testimonials and these referrals. But be sure to stay within the scope of the contract and don't sacrifice your health, your personal interest, anything else to do that, right? And then lastly, realize you're not lucky someone chose you to work with them. You're helping them grow their business and their brand. You're providing value too, right? So that's why you want to position yourself as a partner, not just a service provider. And with that, I'm going to get off my soapbox and let's get some questions going on here.
Terry, I have a quick one.
Yeah, go for it.
It's a little I guess it's it's a little complicated. It's hard to describe, but it's like a feeling that I have. When you
Mhm.
talk about getting feedback from clients, right? There's a type of feedback that you really want to get honest feedback so that you can improve. And there's another type is like guided feedback, so then they can feel good about hiring you and continuing the project or expanding the project. Um, when do you ask either? And then with the guided feedback, how do you turn that into a testimonial? I feel like there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the guided feedback, when should you do that? I mean, you gotta look at your finances. Do you have to keep this person happy? And so maybe you do want to kind of lead it in that conversation that direction if you're kind of on the fence of what they're going to say. And yes, it will help you get these testimonials. Um, I think what I've done in the past is I've actually listed some of the things we've done. We did this, we did this, we did this. I want to get your feedback on, how you think when things went, what can go better, what can we improve, what can we do next. I love saying, what can we do next as well? Because again, I'm future selling at the same time. But when you're looking for tough feedback, you have to find those clients who are just, on a more personal level, so they feel comfortable giving you that blunt feedback. And I have some clients who fortunately have no restrictions whatsoever how they they talk to me. And I do find that to be beneficial. And you have to realize no one's trying to hurt you. They're trying to help you. If they're trying to hurt you, there's something wrong with them. They have something inside of them, which is probably depression turned outwards into anger. And then you should have empathy for them. But if you can grow from it, then you just have to say, look, this is part of my process of continuing to function in my zone of genius and getting better at it on a consistent basis.
Terry, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, Ash, go ahead.
Hey, okay, so where I kind of fall down is that making sure that the client is well taken care of to the point that they give that great testimonial, but it becomes scope creep. And I've tried so many different things. Like every time I work with a client, I'll find like, okay, here was a hole in the process and I'll fix that hole. I'm finding that one of the main things is that people don't read the contracts that they sign. And then we'll start going on the project and they start asking for all this extra stuff. And then I have to have this is the scope, this is what the contract includes. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that? Because I've heard recommendations on, which I do social media, and it's kind of hard to put a bullet point list of A, B, C, D, everything you do, because management is a lot of stuff. So how do you kind of head it off at the pass where that doesn't, just any suggestions on this, where this doesn't become scope creep? Because scope creep is a huge problem for me.
Yeah, what I normally do is during the initial like onboarding call, I'll actually read all those T's and C's. I'll say, okay, so just to kind of frame everything, here's what I'm going to do within this scope. Anything else is an extra line item, and we can talk about that, changing the contract. But as of right now, these are the constraints. So you're saying that to them verbatim. They're not just checking a box.
Yeah.
And then from there, you get that buy-in, that verbal confirmation. If it does creep up, you're just like, hey, happy to do this, but again, this is another line item.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about this. Sometimes you can't do it because you have other stuff going on, and it would interfere with you completing another project or going to yoga or something. So you can't do it. But as long as you get that verbal, yes, I understand, then all parties have agreed to it, both written and verbal.
Great.
And you just have to assert yourself, really. It's like, you're not being rude. You're just saying like, hey, these are constraints and we have to operate within them.
Yeah, I added I use an electronic document signature service to send it over, and I literally added like initials to different sections, so I can say, here's the screenshot where you initialed. But it's almost become this real point of contention that I think I'm gonna have to do that onboarding and go like line by line, because people just don't read.
Yeah. And then that's part of you. I mean, that's part of like the whole business process. So I think if you do that, you'll be off to a better start though.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Ash, one thing that I found helpful, especially in social media management, is, and you're probably already doing this, but productize your services. So let's say package A, B, and C, right? And then sometimes the reason why scope creep happens is because the client is not clear what they want, or they just don't know what it entails. So they're like, oh, I want someone to create content for me. But what they really want is content plus engagement plus, follower growth. But they just assume, package A includes all of that. So I think like clearly listing, oh, A only includes 1 and 2, and then C is the whole shebang. Which one are you choosing?
That's a good, thank you.
All right, I see another question from Kristen. She's saying, why is writing a LinkedIn referral harder than writing something for use on a website? I think some people don't feel as comfortable writing a LinkedIn referral because they know people in their network and see that they wrote it if they go to their profile. But you can actually change that. You can say, don't show on my profile. And if you mention that to people, often they're more likely to give you that referral because it's not on their profile, it's only on yours. So that's what I would suggest if you're getting that kind of pushback.
I like Claire's question. It's like people ask you to do maybe admin things like, hey, can you throw this in an Excel spreadsheet for me? Can you do, extra legwork for me? Like, how do you manage those requests?
Quickly, I just say no, unless it's within the scope. Because it's like, that's not what I'm here for. Like we said that I'm this kind of expert. And if I said, yeah, sure, in admin stuff, that would be different. But going back to what Ash was saying, like, no, like that's, and you're going to be respectful. You can say, maybe we should talk about you getting an admin or something. But that type of work drains your energy. You're fired up when you're operating in your zone of genius. And when you're doing like paperwork, stuff like that, that's your zone of maybe competence. You can do it, but you don't enjoy it and it drains you. So it's these tough conversations that you have to have with people.
Another good question is sometimes clients don't necessarily give you all the information you need to succeed with the project. How do you identify that up front and start to head off the path before things disappoint you and them?
Yeah, what you'll eventually have is a checklist. I need access to this, 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 and this. And then once in a while you get surprised and be like, oh, didn't know that, I'll add it to the list next time. But just as long as you give them all this information you need, you should be in a good spot, and you'll just keep on improving that process over and over again. That's all part of the onboarding process. So like I said, in that templated email, you would say, I need this, 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 and this, and here's how you do it in order for me to successfully complete this project within the scope of time, especially because there could be some back and forth getting access or documents. Do you want to grab one, Shirley? Do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead. Okay, so better for consultant or creative marketer question. Should you go by a business name or your own name? I think there's some like SEO considerations going around here, but Terry, you're the expert.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to SEO, let's pretend you're a digital marketer. You could say it's Terry Rice Digital Marketing and still be okay. What I found though is, because I used to go by the name Brooklyn Digital Marketing. I used to do digital marketing consulting, as you probably guessed by now. And I just wanted some anonymous name that sounded like there might be an agency or something, even though there wasn't. I stopped doing that though, because I found that I wanted to build a personal brand, and I couldn't do that as this name, like Brooklyn Digital Marketing. So once I went by Terry Rice Consulting, that's when I started getting more paid speaking gigs, getting on more podcasts, and people just knew the person behind the business. But if you do plan on expanding, then maybe there is a benefit to having some kind of broader name. But for me and most of the clients I work with, they just go by their name if it's just them, or they have a small team that's not really client facing.
Great. Another question is, I mean, this is a really good one. So in the very beginning, you talked about creating content marketing to get your name out there, but it's a process. It's a little slow at first. What's another way to keep going and put yourself out there? I liked an example that you and I talked about before is through partnerships, right? Cross audiences, cross promotions with other experts in your space that are not directly competitive, but neighboring categories. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, what I've done throughout my career is I proactively looked for opportunities to get in front of my target audience. So I live in Brooklyn. I would reach out to the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce and say, hey, can I do some kind of, in this case, workshop for your members? They would say, sure. And they would email their list. I would show up, and that's how I built my brand. I still do that to this day, though, just because now it's more remotely. But that's why you have to have that value to offer any kind of partner saying, I have this content that would be great for your audience. You know, what do you say? And I really, especially those of you who are saying, oh, I'm not getting any reach, I'm not getting any engagement, do that, because then you'll build a brand, you'll build your brand, you get all these these loyal followers who, when they see your content, they engage, and that's going to boost you in the algorithm. So more people will see it as well.
Very cool. And I'm actually going to share a link in chat right now. This is a course that I created with freelancers in Braintrust Academy. The course name is Ready, Set, Go. It's completely free, but it has a lot of core information in terms of pitching, building pipeline, communication. I think it would be really useful for this group. Please, take a look. Let me know what you think. I've got some really good feedback so far, especially for people trying to build their own scaling. You've started, but how do you scale to the next step? Making sure that you're charging the right way. This course is created for anyone, who just started, to people who have been in the business for 10 plus years. I feel like there's some really good information there. Let me know your feedback. But yeah, I thought I would drop the link in there. Any other questions for Terry? I have my Chihuahua nagging me in the background. That's what you hear.
I think we're all used to people having random background noise at this point, so
yeah,
perfectly acceptable.
I just have a question. Terry, you never mentioned Facebook. Is it just not even appropriate, or it's just not fruitful?
I think the best way to use Facebook is Facebook groups, not necessarily your personal profile or even your business page, because business pages don't get as much reach as they used to. But I'll give you an example. We're in this group, this parents group called Park Slope Parents. And there's this woman in there who kept on giving all this good advice on how to find the best elementary school for your kid. She's a consultant. We reached out to her and we paid her $300 to tell us, okay, go to that school. So if you can go in these groups that are relevant and provide value, not just selling yourself, I think it's an excellent way to use Facebook, but you should probably find a community that's already been established as opposed to trying to create your own, because that's a lot of work that goes into that.
This is the guy making all the noise, by the way. Well, Terry, thank you so much for the session. I thought it was really great. We're seeing in comments, everyone's praising you. Terry, will we be able to distribute your deck to the group?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, fantastic. So what I'll do actually is, this is a recorded session. So I will post it to our website and send it back to everyone along with the deck. And Terry, I'm going to include your contact information so everyone has it. And guess what? If you join Braintrust Academy, it's the free session that I dropped in the link. I'll drop it again. Terry makes a cameo in there. He has another course. I believe this one is pitching yourself to clients inside Braintrust Academy. So you'll see him again in there. Thank you again, Terry. We really appreciate your time. Everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, it's been great. Appreciate it.